over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Big Ten Watto's tennis preview up for this week's event at Indian Wells. 7 outright winners over the last 8 weeks for Big Ten Watto in those previews. You most definitely want to make sure that you're checking that out. Also over there at BangTheBook.com, my 30 MLB season win total previews, all of my Major League Baseball futures stuff for divisions, pennants, World Series, Cy Young, MVP, Home Run King, all that type of stuff, all posted over there at the website. Also, we're covering all 32 conference tournaments. We've got daily NBA and college basketball stuff, golf, NASCAR, UFC, soccer, you name it. We've got it over at BangTheBook.com. Make sure you're checking out our Bang the Book YouTube page as well. And then, of course, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB200 is the promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the Sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. Hopefully, Blog Talk Radio cooperates with us here today. We'll go ahead and give this thing a shot. And we'll bring on today's first guest. That is professional handicapper Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. Brad, how's it going today, man?
That's going well. How you doing?
Doing very well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much for joining me. I know it's a very, very busy time of year for you, so appreciate your time, sir, here on today's show. And let's go ahead and start. We've done a lot of conference tournament stuff this week, but let's talk about some teams that are still playing the regular season, and in particular, the Duke Blue Devils. Not a great look the other night against Wake Forest, eking out that 1-point win. There's a lot going on with this program right now. I'm not sure that any of it's very, very good.
No, I mean, I don't think people grasp how big of an upset that would have been. I mean, and what would you have put the chances? I mean, we've all seen the highlights. The ball rolls around the rim. I mean, I would have said at least an 80% chance that ball goes in. Would you think that's fair?
Yeah, I would say it's fair.
All right, so, I mean, to put in perspective how big of an upset Wake Forest would have been over Duke, last year, number 16 seed in the NCAA tournament, UMBC, was a 21-point underdog against Virginia. The other night, Wake Forest was a 24.5-point underdog at Duke. So, I mean, a bigger upset than a 16 over a 1. A lot of issues for Duke going on right now. Obviously, Zion's a big part of that. And I think just generally speaking, Cam Reddish and Trey Jones have been very underwhelming, two of the other freshmen. R.J. Barrett's played his role, but everyone else hasn't. I mean, you've seen the points per game differentials out there. With Zion, plus 20 points per game. Without him, they're only plus 4 points per game. Zion's not worth 16 points to a line, but he's definitely probably worth 6 or so. And for me, I don't know when he's coming back. I mean, last night he's posting. He's got, 12 different Adidas logos on? I mean, to me, that looks like that's negotiation tactics as far as, not wanting to put the Nike brands back on because that's Duke's brand. I thought he was for sure going to come back. Coach K still thinks he's going to come back, but I got some doubts whether or not he's going to play another game. Adam, if that's the case, I mean, number one, Duke's already way overpriced in the marketplace. 2-1 to win the title. Are you kidding me? I think there's places that are offering the no, like Bookmaker and whatnot. I mean, I'm all over that right now. And that's anticipating Zion will play. I think there's a decent chance he doesn't play at this point. And if he doesn't, in my opinion, I don't. Duke's definitely not number one. I'm not sure they're even top 5, Adam, without him at this point from what we've seen the last 4 or 5 games. So I think there's some major issues there. So, what's Duke's true odds? I mean, they're being priced right now 2-1. I think that's way overpriced to begin with. Without Zion, I think they're no different than some of these teams that are sitting in the 8-1, 10-1 range.
Well, and, I mean, look, from his point of view, I don't think it's worth playing, quite frankly. I mean, he should be the number one pick in the draft no matter what. There's no point in him coming back. So if he comes back, I give him credit for that because, it's something that's not going to affect his draft stock. If I'm him, I just go ahead and sit on the sideline. I don't know Duke anything. I was there for, 7 months or so? I don't know them anything. So I don't think you should bother. But the big thing for Duke here, without a big man presence like Zion Williamson, they are 327th in the country in 3-point percentage shooting this year. 327th. The previous low dating back to 2008 under Coach K was 69th, and that was last year, 37.2%. So that's a big problem for Duke right now is they don't have the same interior presence without Zion, and they're not making shots from the outside. And if there's anything that the NCAA tournament has shown us, it's that if you can make shots from the outside, not only can you create some margin, but you can also upset some teams. Duke's really missing that dynamic right now, and I agree with you. I think their futures price is way out of whack, and dare I say it, once we see the draw on St. Patrick's Day, maybe they're a fade team a little bit earlier in the tournament than you would have expected.
Yeah, maybe in the second round. Well, I think it'll be overpriced in the first round, depending. And, again, a lot of this depends on, if Zion comes back. Because, right now I think he's worth about as much as what LeBron James was at the Cavaliers for so many years. That's what it looks like at this. But you're right, bringing up the three-point shooting. And keep in mind, in one of Duke's biggest wins this year, on the road against Virginia, they had an historical night shooting. Historically good for them, at least for this season. And, Virginia, it was by far their worst for defending the three. So in one of their biggest wins of the season, it was just that rare night where they hit 12 or 13 threes. So no doubt. And, previewing a little bit this weekend, at North Carolina, keep in mind, I get it. North Carolina won the game by 16. Zion goes out. The air, went out of the balloon in the building on that night because it happened so early in the game. But I think people are forgetting North Carolina didn't play overly that well. I think they were like 2 out of 20 from three-point range in the game and still won by 16. I'll be anxious to see what that line opens up at on Saturday. It looks like Zion's doubtful. I think there's probably less than 5% chance he plays in that one. We've already heard that from Coach K. The North Carolina was catching 10 in the first one. I'm thinking we're going to see a massive line adjustment there where North Carolina is easily favored. It's just going to depend on how much. I think at least by 4. I'll be all over the Tar Heels if they're laying anything less than 4.
When you look at Duke this year, they're doing a lot of their damage from 2-point range, obviously, since they're not scoring from 3. 58.5% for the year. They're 56.9% since Zion went out. So not a big drop necessarily, but obviously, again, you're starting to see how much of an impact he has on the offensive end of the floor as things are sort of gradually coming down. So for Coach K, you got to figure some things out here because typically the best coaches and the best teams are rounding into form here in the month of March. And also, too, one other point about Duke, Kentucky obviously didn't have too many problems with this a couple of years ago, but you've got, 4 or 5 freshmen playing such big roles on this team. They're now 30 games into the season. They'll make a little bit of a conference tournament run. They'll wind up playing 34, 35 games before March Madness even starts. There's a fatigue factor when you're a freshman going from playing, 25 high school games to 40 college basketball games, traveling all over the country. You got to worry about that for Duke here too, especially because guys are getting higher usage percentages with Zion not on the floor.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's going to be something that really comes into play, obviously, next week during the ACC tournament if they have a long run. I want to touch on, you mentioned something, Coach K's got to figure things out. I don't think he can at this stage in his career. I get he's a Hall of Famer. Everyone puts him up there. I get it. Career-wise, he's one of the best all time, but if I'm asking, if we're doing a snake draft, who's the best X's and O's coaches in college basketball, he's not upper tier. I think he's average, and especially, a big part of his success, he's had really good assistant coaches, former players that have been there. But look who he's lost in recent years. Steve Wojciechowski's doing a great job at Marquette. He was alongside Coach K for, a better part of more than a decade. The best recruiter, the guy who recruited all these guys, Jeff Capel, he's at Pittsburgh right now. I'm not sure that, if Zion doesn't come back or if they continue to have issues like you just mentioned, the freshman hitting the wall as far as energy goes and not used to it, the workload, I'm not sure they figure this out. So, again, if you can get – I think that the overall arch here, whether Zion comes back or not, if you can get after a yes-no – on Duke, will they win the title or not, and lay anything, on the no at, minus 300 or less, I think that's offering value right now in the marketplace.
Yeah, I definitely think so as well. And Duke will be a very interesting team. We'll see, if they get a favorable draw, we'll see how far away from home they wind up playing. All that type of stuff should be very interesting. And also, too, if they lose to North Carolina this weekend and then they get bounced in the ACC tournament relatively
quickly. They don't deserve a 1.
Well, and that's the question then is, do they lose out on some of that favorable draw that we all expected them to get? How many times have we seen it with teams, Kansas playing in the Midwest all the time, Duke playing in the Southeast, North Carolina playing in the Southeast? Do they maybe lose a little bit of that because of how the tail end of the season goes? And if so, how much does that impact their futures price and, the loss of Zion? There's a lot going into this Duke team here, and, it's good to talk about here on the show because while we spend a lot of time talking about under-the-radar types of things, I mean, this is front and center. For every novice, amateur, college basketball handicapper, they're looking at Duke. And to be able to talk this through, I think is a big help for them.
Yeah, I think so. And what you just mentioned, I mean, they lose to North Carolina and get bounced relatively early in the ACC. I not what the committee is going to probably do that. I mean, it's Duke for Pete's sake, so I'm sure they'll get a 1 seed, but I don't think their resume would signify that they deserve a 1 seed at that point. I think a North Carolina team that would sweep them in the regular season meetings would be more deserving. And then whoever comes out of the SEC tournament, whether it be Kentucky or Tennessee, probably would deserve a 1 seed over them, along with obviously Virginia and Gonzaga getting 1 seed. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they put them and place them. And to me, it's the biggest factor in college basketball because it's such, an impact on the futures market right now. And I think we can make money. Fading this Duke team at this point and fading all the different individual props are out there in the futures marketplace.
Well, and Duke also a team with 1 conference tournament win in the ACC dating back to 2011, and that was in 2017. So, also if you're Coach K and you think you've got this freshman wall, and obviously we're going down a big Duke rabbit hole, but if you think you've got this freshman wall, maybe it's in your best interest to win a game, maybe 2, and then just kind of casually bow out of the tournament and let those guys get a blow. So that's also a factor, too. I mean, he's proven that, with 1 conference tournament win since 2011, it's not really a big point of emphasis for him. I wouldn't expect it to be this year either.
Yeah, and, they get the double bye, so that'll help them early. But, obviously the ACC is really deep. I expect Duke to win at least 1 game. But once you win 2 or 3, 2, and then you're playing 3 games in 3 nights, they can have some negative impacts moving forward for them. I just think it's a very, very interesting topic and something that I don't think we're going to have complete answers here until, the St. Patrick's Day when they announce the tournament and whether or not Zion's going to be playing.
All right, so speaking of conference tournaments here, we've got 13 of them going on this week. We've got 19 next week. Some of them, of course, have already started here, as we know. The A-Sun, Patriot, Big South, the Horizon also started. We've got some starting up here today. The Missouri Valley, the MAAC, the West Coast Conference. We'll talk about the West Coast Conference in a few minutes here. The SoCon starts tomorrow. 3 more start on Saturday. So, Brad, what about some general conference tournament betting tips from you? This is a unique type of format where we've got back-to-back games for the first time since those early season, non-conference showcase tournaments. What sort of factors into this equation for you?
I think one that certainly gets overplayed, and it's something you'll hear a lot. It's tough to beat a team 3 times in the same season. One of your guests that comes on weekly, Ralph Michaels, close friend of mine, he did some research here. In the last 4 years, if a team lost the first 2 games of the season, so they're playing, in the same season, they have double revenge, tough to beat a team 3 times in a season, that gets priced into the marketplace. In fact, it's exactly 50%. The research he came up with was like 235 and 235. Against the number. So don't overreact to, it's tough to beat a team 3 times. On one hand, the one team can be clearly superior to the other. Another hand is, they just got a significant matchup advantage, whether it's, a height advantage, whether it's depth advantage. or it's just, a matchup that they just can't deal with, whether it be an individual player. So I think that's something that gets overhyped. A couple of factors I just mentioned, it may be a depth advantage as we go along in these tournaments. One thing to keep an eye on, and I don't think it always gets priced in the overnight lines, but it eventually does, because you only got a 24-hour window at best when it comes to being able to bet these games, and a lot of times maybe a 12-hour window. On those opening lines, if you want to attack them, one thing that doesn't get fully accounted for is, playing against those teams that might have played, an overtime game the night before, extra minutes on the legs. They're not a deep team to begin with. A lot of times in that following game, at least at the opener, it's not properly accounted for. And, generally speaking, I think you can get some softer lines if you're betting some of the openers here. And, look, the bookies are afraid. Some books aren't going to put the lines out until game day, maybe 6 to 8 hours before tip time. So here, a key, thought is if the bookies are scared, they're not wanting to put lines up, there's a reason for it. Hence, there can be some great value when it comes to these conference tournaments.
And I think there's a lot of value, too. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday in our second segment with Wes Reynolds. I think derivative betting is a really strong attribute when you talk about these conference tournaments. So you look at the game last night in the Horizon between Detroit Mercy and Northern Kentucky. Northern Kentucky got off to a horrible start. They're down 7 at the break. They're a 13-point or a 14-point favorite for the full game. Their second half line was 11, and they covered the second half. They won by 18. Sometimes you'll have that, where a team that's a big favorite comes out, and maybe they don't cover the full game number because they're a little bit sluggish at the start, but those good teams generally wake up at halftime. I think those are opportunities you really want to look for here in conference tournaments.
No question about it. And just as it gets more and more popular, the in-game live wagering opportunities are just there. If you want to be serious and make money in this now, it's the completely different scenario than prior to the game as far as handicapping it and knowing what you're doing. But no doubt, and we see a lot of teams that are emotional. And I'll tell you, again, as we get along in the tournaments and it's that third game in 3 days or that fourth game in 4 days, maybe that team's just playing on raw emotion early, but how many times do we see that team in the second half just run out of gas? And again, that's not getting properly accounted for if you're in-game live wagering. So there's so many opportunities. For me, once it gets to the conference semifinals and championship games, especially in the one-bid leagues, I think more often than not, I want to play unders because every possession matters. We're talking about the opportunity to go play for an NCAA tournament, get that bid. That's something I could take advantage of. I think overall, everyone loves to talk about, hey, come NCAA tournament, that opening weekend, the first 4 days are the best time to come to Vegas. Everyone does that, but I'd argue the best time to make money coming to Vegas is conference tournament week, not the NCAA tournament week. It's actually the week prior. And more games, more unique betting opportunities to take advantage of it. I think if you want to be serious in this industry and make some money, this upcoming week is the week to make the most money, and it's the week to visit Vegas.
Another example real quick here, Bryant and St. Francis, Pennsylvania, yesterday in the Northeast Conference. That's the 8-versus-1 game. The number 1 seed, St. Francis, up 18 at the intermission. They put it in cruise control in the second half. They only won the game by 4, failed to cover the full game number. But that's another thing you'll see. That tournament's a little bit different with some off days in between. But if you get a team that's got a big lead and they play tomorrow, they're probably going to wind up taking their foot off the gas in that game in the second half. So that'll be something you want to keep in mind here as we go along as well. And to further your point about conference tournaments being a more profitable opportunity than March Madness, I completely agree, especially because we've got a lot more data points on these teams relative to their conference brethren. Whereas when you get Vermont versus Wisconsin in the first round of the NCAA tournament, maybe you have an idea of what you think could happen, but it's just that. It's a hypothesis. It's an idea. It's not really backed by anything from a data standpoint. In conference tournaments, you have a much better idea because you've got 1 or 2 data points from this season, several data points over the last few seasons, and theoretically speaking, the talent gap should be smaller because these are conference competition.
Yeah, and you got, data points comparing, you got common opponents. I mean, 20 games worth nearly of common, or at least 10 to 15 of common opponents. So, and when you got more data points, it's a lot easier as far as making a general overall handicap. You got two teams that never played one another, two conferences as a whole hardly ever played one another. It makes the handicap that much more difficult. So I think that's a very strong point from you that I haven't heard that too many people make.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, you get these 12 versus 5, 13 versus 4 games in March Madness, and everyone picks, the trendy dog from the small conference and this and that. And for every upset or every close game we have, we probably have just as many games where the major conference team wins by 10 or 12 or something like that. So, there's always romanticism about those teams that pull the upsets, but for every upset, there's also a situation where that major conference team covers the number.
Yeah, and some of those 4-13, 5-12s, there's some high variance in those. I mean, it's either, to me, from watching them over the years, it's either outright upset or it's blowout. A lot of times, and again, I'm just generally speaking here and just calling from my own memory, a lot of times I don't see a lot of those games come down to the line too much. It's either, hey, the public's going to be right on that popular 12 versus 5 upset, or they're going to be dead wrong in the 5 or 4 seed or whatever just wins the game by 15 or 20 points. So that's something that I often find come NCAA tournament time.
All right, so something you mentioned that I want to circle back to here for a minute. You mentioned teams on the bubble or teams that are in one-bid leagues that have maybe had a really good regular season, and they're not really sure. Wofford comes to mind. I mean, Wofford should be in the tournament. There's no doubt about that, but they're not a guarantee because, the selection committee generally takes the 500 conference record major team over the mid-major that has a huge year in a smaller conference. But there's an extra added element of pressure for those teams at this time of the year.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, number one, I think those teams get overpriced because everyone knows them. Hey, this team's really good, but they're in a one big league. They need to win. Number one, it's extra pressure on them. But number two, the market knows that, and you're paying a similar thing happens to the bubble teams in the major conferences. I mean, everyone knows, hey, this team's on the bubble. They need to win this game. I mean, number one, it's extra pressure. Number two, public likes to bet that team because that game, theoretically might mean something more to them than their opponent. So oftentimes you're laying an extra point or so. And to me, I know it's not popular, but it's certainly contrarian. I think you can make money long term. I don't mind fading the teams with the extra pressure on them in the one big leagues. I don't mind fading the bubble teams that need a win or it's go home time in the major conferences. So and that's how I operate. And I know at least Freddie Fanny Pack and Joe Public are thinking differently on that when it comes to conference tournament. Another way I think you can get after it and make some money. Come not only this weekend, but all the next week.
Do people still wear fanny packs? Is that still a thing?
Well, I mean, you don't see it too much on the Strip, but if you go to Fremont Street, I see it more often there. I certainly do.
Well, you got to have something to carry your heroin needles with, down there on Fremont. So I guess you'd use a fanny pack for that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen it a time or two when I'm heading down to the Nugget, putting in my contest picks. Oh, yeah, I saw quite a few of that these past football weekends.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen needles and stuff on the ground at Binion's in the bathroom or something like that. All right, but not to get too far off topic here. Speaking of things going on out in Las Vegas, the West Coast Conference tournament out there at the Orleans Arena, and we kind of brushed past this conference with Kyle Hunter earlier in the week because, let's be honest, it looks like it's very, very, very difficult for someone to beat Gonzaga.
Yeah, I mean, on a neutral floor, Gonzaga's, hell, we just saw it last week. They're at St. Mary's, the second-best team from a power ratings point, and the number 2 seed, and what Gonzaga's laying 10 on the road, and they cover. So, I mean, on neutral, they're, 14 points better than a team like St. Mary's. So, and then the tournament's set up, obviously, for Gonzaga to have success. They have a triple bye. So they don't play tonight. They don't play second round. They don't play the third round. They get a bye right in the semifinals. So I mean, it's one of the reasons why Gonzaga's won 7 straight of these is, they're just better than everybody else, even though St. Mary's has been a pretty good program. And number 2, it's just set up so well for them to have some success. So I get it. There's not going to be some popular, futures betting options. But, one thing I picked this conference to go over, to put Gonzaga aside, I think that this is one of the deeper and more intriguing West Coast Conference, the tournaments that we've had here in recent memory. I think, St. Mary's taken a step back, towards the middle of the pack a little bit. They're still, the second best team, but not with significant margin. San Francisco having a relatively good season. BYU's BYU a little bit. San Diego's, kind of disappointed down the stretch. But I think the rest of the league, outside of Portland, there's not much separation. I think it's a lot more intriguing. I think we'll have some better matchups come second and third round, and even one of them tonight, much more than what we've had in the past. I think it's just a little more intriguing from that aspect.
Are you sitting courtside tonight for Pacific and Pepperdine in Portland and San Diego?
No, I will not be. But I am going to try to. We got 4 here in town, and I've been a bad Las Vegian, or whatever they call us here. I think I'm borderline getting to that point now that I've been here 3 years. But, yeah, I need to make a couple tournaments, I think, this year, and I'll do so. But will not be, tonight's pair of games will not be one of them.
And, of course, the 4 conference tournaments out there, the Pac-12, the Mountain West, the WAC, and this West Coast Conference tournament. Let me ask you real quickly here. I do want to end with college football because we always talk college football, and I want to make sure we do that. Are you playing a lot of stuff in the futures market for teams to win these conference tournaments, or are you just, mostly playing regular day-by-day handicapping?
Day-by-day handicapping for me. I know there's some futures out there. I don't follow the Northeast Conference like I do some of the others. Obviously, I don't think there's great futures value in this conference. So, not right now. I haven't made a single bet on the futures. Now, next week might change. Maybe I think a certain team in the ACC or the Big Ten gets a favorable draw, and I can see it. And I don't think they're being properly priced. But more often than not, if you really like a team and their matchups. And it's so difficult to project forward, to be perfectly frank with you, that if you really think a team's undervalued that much, why not bet them against the spread? Why not bet them on the money line and mechanical parlay it out? I don't get it. If you really like the team that much to put some money on a futures, the mechanical parlay more often than not is going to pay out more to begin with. And the fact that you have a decision to make to either get out of the bet, as you're going along with it helps because, who knows if you got a tournament that, how do you know the matchups, 3 games in advance? You just don't. So, no, I don't play too many futures when it comes to conference tournament. I give me the individual game handicaps. I think can be a lot more positive EV.
Well, and something you alluded to, something we talked about a lot in our previous conference tournament segments this week, and for our listeners that haven't heard those yet, even though some of those conference tournaments have started, still a lot of good angles and approaches for the 19 that are coming up here next week. The moneyline rollover is something that makes a lot more sense than a futures price more often than not. You're usually going to get a lot more return on your investment. And again, the easy way to hedge that is to stop betting it as opposed to putting more money out there for a hedge. So moneyline parlays, absolutely 100% something that people should take a look into here for the conference tournaments and also for the NCAA tournament as well.
No doubt about it. Mechanical parlay as we get, more and more states and this becomes, out of the shadows and out of the gray. Hopefully it becomes more popular, but if it doesn't, the books will be more than happy to take your money when it comes to futures. They got a 35% ROI on those futures compared to, the 5% when it comes to individual game betting.
All right, so we'll wrap this up by talking some college football because it's just kind of what we do. Brad Powers and I always talk college football here on his segments, so we'll do that here today. And, as we started talking last week, spring games popping up, spring practices, pretty much everybody doing those now. Still some transfer news and stuff like that, but you had a chance to sit down and watch the Arizona State spring game last week. What did you take away from that and sort of walk us through your process of, what you're looking for to help you out for your preseason preparations.
Yeah, I mean, number one, the big factor is, historically early, especially for a major conference. We've seen teams in the past, like your Armies and Appalachian, wrap up spring at the end of February, early March. But really, to wrap up this time of year when most are just starting, so a month early for Arizona State. What am I looking for? I'm not looking for stats in a spring game. I'm just looking for guys that are capable of making plays. And I guess it's more of a scouting thing. Like to me, it's no different than, if I was able to get an inside peek at a practice, who's impressing, who are guys that I don't know that I didn't see from last year. And can I project them forward for the upcoming year, whether they're replacing a starter or are they just, on an upward trajectory as a player? So very player specific for me. And then, I think you get a good deep dive as long as the announcers are good, because keep in mind that they get kind of an inside peek at the team. They're following much, it's just not one practice for them, the spring game. They've watched several practices. So I'm looking for particular storylines to come out of practice. Are there concerns about the depth on the defensive line? Are the defensive backs exceeding expectations throughout spring? Have a quarterback or two emerge if we have a little bit of a quarterback controversy with the incumbent gone. So generally speaking, that's what I'm looking for. And look, it's not an end all, but I think with 130 teams, if you can spend just a couple hours to actually watch a team in a game-like atmosphere, preferably inside the stadium, I think it's about as good as of a get as you're gonna. This time of year, a good early look at what the team's going to be about. Now, I would say don't try it at home. Don't overreact. But I've been doing it. I started going to spring games. Notre Dame spring game, I think the first one I went to was like 1989. So I've been doing this for a long time as far as, looking at players and evaluating talent at the spring. So it's something that I've kind of almost was bred into, that I think it's one of my strengths as far as me as a handicapper.